After the passing of Eliza Good in the spring of 1888, Tom Good, his wife Mary, and his sister Clara had an abundance of work to maintain at Myrtleville. For the ladies, caring for Mary's 5 children, as well as the aging Eliza Laird, was almost overwhelming. This led the family to become well acquainted with Brantford's first regular hospital, built by John Stratford in 1885. Eliza stayed there regularly, and Tom's brother Charles sent money home on a regular basis to cover the bills. Also that summer, Tom's son William took the entrance exam for the local high school. He was only 12 at the time, 2 years younger than the average candidate, but was ranked 4th out of 94 children from the county. William attended the Collegiate Institute in Brantford when the next term opened, and he either walked the 3 miles from Myrtleville to the school on George Street or rode in on horseback. 2 of William's closer friends while at school were Arthur Lyons, who shared an interest in mechanical and electrical gadgets, and his cousin George Bellacci, who helped William build a forge in the workshop at Myrtleville. Clara Good followed in her siblings' footsteps and traveled out west once her mother passed away, and that left Mary and Anne to run the house. While Anne's role was technically subordinate to that of her sister-in-law, the two lived together affectionately for the following 30 years. Both were deeply religious and held a strong aversion to dancing, intoxicating liquors, and frivolous books. In 1891, Tom was one of the founders of the North Brant Dairy Association, and the group built a cheese factory north of Brantford on what is now Highway 24. There was an emphasis in the city placed on livestock and dairy farming rather than growing wheat, which was seen as a Western specialty. William remembers his father's, quote, enormous amount of clerical drudgery, unquote, while in the role of secretary for the cheese factory, in addition to his work on the farm. In 1892, Mary Tom had the opportunity to take a vacation, so she and her 14-year-old daughter Mamie went to Paisley to visit Mary and Sam Bellacci. Tom wrote to his wife twice during her trip, once to send news that Anne had taken out a pew at St. Jude's Church, after she had, quote, run out of patience with the unorthodoxy of the rector, unquote, at Grace Anglican. The other letter was to tell it about his excursion to Toronto with William. Quote, Willie wanted to see the Toronto Fair very much and did not wish to go alone, so I went with him. We were away for 2 days, and the show was immense, and Willie enjoyed himself a good deal. I was sorry to spend the time and money, but Willie wanted to see the show, unquote. The fall of 1894 was a difficult one for the Goods. Charles died on August 23rd at the age of 59. His younger sister Mary passed away 2 months later at the age of 49, after many frequent spells with jaundice. Her family had thought of her passing as a blessed release, as she had been dealing with bouts of the disease for 6 years. A year later, by the autumn of 1895, 3 of Tom's children were enrolled at the Collegiate Institute. William was entering his final year of university preparation courses. Louisa, just shy of 16, was finishing up her preparation for teacher's training. Like her brother, she had entered the collegiate young, at the age of 13, but she had the highest entry score out of the 190 candidates that year. She, quote, proceeded through her courses at record speed. Ethel, like her brother, had entered the collegiate at 12, but complained about feeling lazy and stupid compared to her elder siblings. A report card of hers from that year stated the opposite, rather that she was, quote, one of the most promising pupils in the class and is doing admirable work, unquote. In the spring of 1896, William passed his scholarship exams at the University of Toronto with flying colors. He received first-class honors in English, French, German, history and geography, mathematics, natural science, biology, chemistry, and physics. He had received 3 scholarships and ranked first for 3 others, but the latter 3 were given to other students. That autumn, William and his cousins Panayotti and Fred Bellacci began school at the University of Toronto. Panay and Fred attended the dental school, and William entered the University College, studying mostly science, math, and English. The spring of 1897 kept Tom Good busier than ever. He had become the treasurer for Brantford Township and continued his clerical work for the cheese factory and the Binder Twine Company, likely Brantford Cordage's location on Pearl Street in 1888. Myrtleville was bustling with activity during the spring of 1897 as well. Spring cleaning was often more labor-intensive than fall cleaning, as the stoves needed to be taken down, the carpets taken outside and beaten, the ceilings whitewashed, and butter to be made. 2 of the farm's residents were not able to take part in the house cleaning. Caroline, Tom Good's youngest, and Anne became close over their shared interest in gardening. Years later, Caroline wrote, quote, "We were great pals, Aunt Annie and I. She was a little old lady with a sweet little face and smooth hair, golden red turning gray, parted in the middle and brushed smoothly down with a miniature puff over each ear. Spring was here. Gardening days, swinging days were here for me. Up and down on the swing I went. The swing was tied to a large limb of an old big willow tree. Here was Aunt Annie coming down the slope towards me. 'How would you like to make a garden?' she asked me. 'Make a garden? What a joy!' The high point in the summer of 1901 was the family's visit to the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. Caroline, who was 10 at the time, wrote to William, quote, "I am wanting to earn some money to go to the Pan American show. I am to get 5 cents for every 1-pound ball of carpet rags I sew, and Mamie is going to let me have the eggs of 1 hen to sell, and in the summer I might sell some rhubarb. If you find anything more for me to make money, tell me." While they all enjoyed the family trip, the memory was dimmed by returning home in a terrible storm and finding that 4 of their cows had been struck dead by lightning. Many of Tom Good's children had active roles as teachers in Brantford and the surrounding towns. In 1901, Louisa was teaching in Broxton, near Stratford, and the 21-year-old wrote home often about her life in and near the big city. She cheerfully detailed long bicycle rides, garden parties, and being appointed with the musical director of the Broxton Literary and Debating Society. The same year, 19-year-old Ethel was teaching in New Dundee, roughly 20 miles from Myrtleville. She boarded with the Lautenschlagers, an immigrant family in the area, and, quote, "made the acquaintance of German food," unquote. In a letter home, she described the Mennonite women. Quote, "They dress very plainly, black or gray dresses, no frills, collars, or ribbons, and bonnets something like the Salvation Army. In church, however, they take them off and wear just little white net caps. They pull their hair straight back. I don't believe women were intended to look so plain. They have an objection to yellow, and the minister preached against the wearing of it," unquote. In subsequent letters, she described learning to speak German, skating on the pond, and trying sauerkraut for the first time, which she enjoyed. Near the end of that year, William was appointed to a teaching position at the Agricultural College in Guelph, in the Department of Chemistry. He was to be paid $900 a year to start, around $16,000 today, which he had hoped to use to hire more help for the farm. He also looked forward to spending the summers working on the farm and applying science he was teaching to the practice of agriculture. Before he left for Guelph, on New Year's 1902, there was a reunion at Myrtleville of Ellen and Eliza's surviving children. They had not been all together since Isabella moved westward almost 22 years before. Anne was 70 years old and, quote, "plump and placid." Charlotte was almost 65. Tom, 58, looked older than his years due to the stress of the farm. Isabella was 56, with her hair pulled back and sharpened features, and the youngest was Clara at 51. The discussion that year also surrounded the passing of Queen Victoria and held a certain sentimentality. The Canadian Myrtleville was built the same year that she became queen, so to mark the reign of a new sovereign was one that the family did with a sense of hesitation. Even William, who consistently advocated for social change, wrote, quote, "I feel that the personal influence of the new king will not be so wholesome than that of his mother," unquote. William balanced his summer of 1902 between teaching at the college and assisting on the farm, as Tom was losing weight and suffering from chest pains. He was of great help in repairing the windmill, finishing the horse stable, and construction of the hexagonal cement silo. This silo was considered a novelty in the neighborhood, as silos were few and far between to begin with, and those that were around were typically wooden. That year as well, William was leaning steadily more into the idea of leaving the college and working on the farm full-time. He was not teaching as much as he had hoped, and the equipment at Guelph was not up to the same standard that he was used to from his University of Toronto days. That fall, he wrote to his ailing father and offered to rent Myrtleville from him so that Tom and Mary could move into town. Tom responded that most of the rent would go to Aunt Annie, and whatever was left over could not provide enough to be livable at another property. With that, William turned his thoughts towards moving home the following spring. He wrote to his sister Mamie with his plan, and her answer was considerably less forgiving than that of their fathers. She wrote, quote, "You speak as if you thought of coming home for good or bad in the spring. I think it would be the height of selfish folly for you to do so. What would there be for any of us but more scrimping and slaving? You could not make anything like what you do up there. It is impossible. No farmers do. Of course, there are disagreeable things to be put up with in Guelph, but is there any place outside of heaven where there are not? If you have to come back, I will try to help you all that I can, but in the meantime, I wish you would try to put your heart and mind into your work there," unquote. Between the scathing letters from Mamie and the letters from his parents, it seems that William gave up his plan of returning home that spring. However, that did not sway his hope to returning to the farm at some point. This eventually happened when William returned to the farm for good shortly after his father's 60th birthday, when he began a 5-year lease on October 1st, 1903. 4 months later, tragedy struck Myrtleville yet again. On February 4th, 1904, an obituary in the Brantford Expositor carried the news that Tom Good had passed away from pneumonia. In his will, the property of the farm was left to William, and Mamie and Louisa took over the role of maintaining the house and looking after their mother. In 1908, after many summers of intensive labor on the farm, William married Jenny McCormick in a small ceremony held in her parents' home near Paris on December 3rd. 1909 and 1910 brought their share of medical troubles to Myrtleville. In September 1909, the child that William and Jenny were expecting arrived stillborn, and the birth nearly killed Jenny. Not long after, Aunt Annie, nearing 80 years old, missed the bottom step of the main staircase and broke her hip. After Mamie's wedding in July of 1910, Louisa left her teaching position to care for Aunt Annie. This seemed to work in favor for them both, as Louisa was dealing with fits of nervous depression. In his later years, William remembered most vividly that, quote, "she felt it a sin to be tired and drove herself irrationally and unmercifully," unquote. Louisa spent a short time in a private hospital in Toronto from January to April 1911 to recoup from this position. In the summer of 1912, William began construction of the new house on the property. He, quote, "scorned luxury but admired convenience," unquote. And with the help of an agricultural college student, he laid the bricks for the 2-story home. William and his family moved into the new home in November, although the construction was not quite finished. It did, however, have all of the modern conveniences, like a coal furnace, stationary wash tubs, and an upstairs bathroom, hot and cold running water, and electrical wiring, though there was no power yet. By 1914, William's youngest sisters were all engaged to be married. Fanny and Caroline were both engaged to former agricultural college graduates who had worked on the farm at Myrtleville. Fanny's fiancé, Arthur Houghton, was preparing to leave for India to be an agricultural missionary, and she was to follow him there. The pair further caused a stir by the fact that Houghton was leaving his Methodist church to join Fanny's Presbyterian congregation. Unlike her younger sisters, Ethel was not engaged yet, but was attracting the attention of one Mr. Harry Surratt, who had helped William build a barn on the property back in 1907. On one occasion, he was able to be in Brantford between his trains and invited Ethel to an early dinner at the Kirby house. While she was not a young girl anymore, 25 years old at this point, the invitation horrified Aunt Annie. Quote, "What? Eat in a tavern with a man, alone? Someone must go with you," she said. This resulted with Caroline being forced to accompany the pair to dinner. In June of 1915, almost a year after the First World War began, Mamie noted in a letter that, quote, "there does not seem to be any outward sign of war, except flags on almost every house," unquote, and that 4 factories in town were making shells. She remarked as well that at the teas she attended, everyone was knitting for soldiers, including her Aunt Annie, who was almost 84 years old. The closest that the war came to Myrtleville was through William's cousin, Fanny Doyle. Her husband, Major Panayoti Percy Balachi, was a part of the Dufferin Rifles and was appointed second in command of the 58th Battalion in 1915. He arrived in France in early 1916 and wrote home on April 18th. Quote, "This is rather a funny game we are playing out here. The artillery do nearly all the damage. Of course, snipers account for a few men, but by far the most damage is done by the artillery. And mighty nasty things the big shells are. The life in the trenches is a very miserable existence. The last place I was in, I had a hole in the ground 6 feet long by 4.5 wide, and about the same height, and I was lucky to have that. A great many men had no dugouts at all and had to sleep on the firing step. Yet they tell us they were good trenches," unquote. Less than 2 months after writing the letter, on June 14th, Balachi was killed by a shell while doing reconnaissance. He was 38 years old. In 1919, there was a provincial election that put the United Farmers government under E.C. Drury. William Good was one of the team members that drafted the party platform and was in the councils of the government in Toronto. In 1921, when the next federal election was held, William ran for office as an independent progressive and was elected as representative for Brant County. He was in office for 4 years before retiring from politics and returning to Myrtleville in 1925. Also in 1921, he became the president of the Cooperative Union of Canada and held that position for 24 years. He also served on the board of the United Cooperatives of Ontario for 35 years. The farm at Myrtleville fared better than its western counterparts when the Depression hit in 1929. The combination of being a mixed farm, with dairy, grain, and produce, as well as its proximity to the city, helped keep some form of stability. Like her predecessors, Jenny Good was a pillar of stability within the family during this time. She kept a keen eye on the expenses and made the sheets, night clothes, and aprons out of unbleached muslin bags that she obtained from her cousins in Galt. In early 1939, William Good was involved with planning a conference between the 5 eastern provinces in Montreal on marketing agriculture products. By September of that year, Canada declared war on Germany. In 1940, Mary Good, Tom's widow and the last link to the first generation of Myrtleville had passed away at 87 years old. By 1942, all of the hired help on the farm had gone. William, now 66 and suffering from arthritis in his hip and lower back, relied tremendously on his sons Harold and Robert to complete most of the farming tasks. In 1944, while William was away on cooperative union business, Jenny was left to handle the selling of a large crop of apples from the family orchard. Without any domestic help, much of the housework would be forgotten about as she dealt with customers. Understandably, she found the sugar shortage to be of assistance, as it meant that she was unable to can the orchard's typical hundreds of quarts of fruit. The following summer, all of the chickens on the farm had been sold, and Jenny noted that, quote, "There is far more money in cattle and not enough help on the farm to look after so many branches," unquote. By 1948, the aging William, who was 72 at that point, retired from both of his positions within the Cooperative Union of Canada, as well as the United Cooperatives of Ontario. The same year, Carol Good, William's youngest sister, gave up her summer use of the original house to William's children and grandchildren. William and Jenny enjoyed the company of their grandchildren, as they were fascinated with the old farm tools, and the little girls were often thrilled to have tea parties with their grandmother. In 1959, Jenny Good passed away suddenly following a surgery, and the loss was very hard on William. One of his daughter-in-laws noted that he is a man with great inner resources. He made several winter visits to his daughter's home in St. Louis after Jenny died, and lived at Myrtleville the rest of the year. In the 1960s, the farm was becoming more specialized under Robert's care, phasing out the horses and the orchard and focusing on dairy. In 1963, William moved into a nursing home in Paris before passing away on November 16, 1967, at 91 years old. The Brantford Expositor ran the following editorial. Quote, "This many-sided man of science, agriculture, teaching, and politics, and authorship packed into the years from 1914 to 1925, much more than most men do in a lifetime. And even when out of the spotlight, he continued his endeavors, among them 25 years as president of the Cooperative Union of Canada. One of a rare breed of men is no longer with us." Unquote. In 1978, the documents were signed that donated 5 acres of land containing 2 houses, a swimming pool, which has since been filled in, and a number of silos to Heritage Canada. Many of the artifacts in the museum found their way back to Myrtleville from previous family members. Original pieces from Eliza Good, such as the big 4-poster bed in the master bedroom, her colored piano, now located in the parlor, and the dollhouse that they gave to their daughter Anne, still remains in the home. Likewise, William Good's handmade camera still remains in the library, along with shelves and shelves of books that the Good family enjoyed. Just like in episode 3, a majority of this information for this episode was sourced from Myrtleville, a Canadian farm and family, 1837 to 1967, by Beth Good Latzer. Copies can be found for purchase through the Brant Historical Society or can be borrowed from the Brantford Public Library. And join us in 2 weeks' time for the 6th episode of our series, which will focus on John Turner, a local architect, and a portion of the buildings he designed here in Brantford.